I sit near the window of my new room, watching as autumn leaves dance lazily across the lawn of this place they call Autumn Days. It's ironic. Really, what a poetic name for such a bleak prison. I'm Ebenezer Hollister, 77 years old. For most of those years, I believed discipline, planning, and order were the keys to a meaningful life. As a tax consultant, I built my career on numbers, honest, predictable, incorruptible numbers. People are the opposite. They smile. When they lie, shake hands as they stab you in the back. I've seen enough schemes, betrayals, and under-the-table deals to last 5 lifetimes. I never expected the final betrayal to come from my own daughter, Cordelia. She was always headstrong, difficult, even as a child. I was hard on her, perhaps too much. I expected excellence, perfection. My late wife, Eleanor, used to say I was too strict. Maybe she was right. After Eleanor died from cancer 11 years ago, things only got colder between Cordelia and me. Our bond, already strained, froze over completely. The visits became rare, the calls perfunctory. Then came the stroke. Just a minor one, the doctor said, but it left me weaker, slower, unsure. For the first time, I felt the edge of mortality creeping in. My left arm wouldn't cooperate, and sometimes the morning fog in my head wouldn't lift until noon. Still, I was managing. Or so I thought. When Cordelia and her husband Trent came to see me after the hospital, their concern felt rehearsed. I noticed how they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't watching. And then came the suggestion, "Dad, Trent, I don't think you should be living alone anymore," Cordelia said, her voice gentle but firm. I knew what was coming next. They spoke of nursing homes. "Just until you recover," they said. Autumn days sounded pleasant enough. Trent mentioned the need for constant medical care, something he and Cordelia couldn't provide with their work schedules. I listened quietly. I didn't argue, at least. Not then, but I wasn't ready to leave the home I had shared with Eleanor. That house held decades of memories, of laughter, arguments, birthdays, and quiet evenings on the porch. It was more than just property. It was my last connection to a life that had once felt full. Still, Cordelia returned 3 days later with paperwork. "It's all arranged," she said briskly. Trent waited in the car. "We're selling the house. The proceeds will cover your expenses. At Autumn Days and set aside money for your future care," she added, barely meeting my eyes, "and whatever's left would be theirs, of course," I protested. She said I was being unreasonable. I could see it in her eyes' impatience, not concern. The decision had already been made. A week later, I was wheeled into this place. The walls were painted in dull pastels, the furniture worn. The smell a mix of disinfectant and quiet resignation. Cordelia promised it was temporary. I didn't believe her. They brought in a few of my things, a photo of Eleanor, my reading glasses, a few books. But this wasn't a home. It was a holding pen, a waiting room for death. And then came the final insult. The next day, Cordelia and Trent visited to discuss finances with the administrator. I was told to rest, but something in my gut told me to listen. I wandered down the hall, hand brushing the cold walls to steady myself. Their voices drifted from behind the ajar office door. "Let's go with the most economical package," Trent said. I stopped in my tracks. "But Mr. Hollister's condition would benefit from physical therapy and personalized care," the administrator replied kindly. Cordelia didn't hesitate. "My father always lived modestly. He wouldn't want extravagance." I felt a heat rise in my chest. Modest? I gave them everything. Paid for her education, her wedding, helped them buy their first home. I was never cheap. I was generous, too. "Generous, perhaps," Trent chimed in. "The basic plan is enough." We can add services later if necessary. No, they never would. Because it wasn't about my care, it was about the money. My money. My life's work divided behind my back while I sat in a pale green room trying to remember what day it was. I shuffled back to my room, heart pounding not from anger alone, but from clarity. This wasn't care. This was control. And I had allowed it, but I wasn't done. Not yet. Let them think the old man is helpless. Let them count their inheritance before I'm cold in the ground. What they forgot is that I'm still Ebenezer Hollister, and I still have a few numbers left to play. Numbers and identifying patterns began to work. I remembered the looks Cordelia and Trent had exchanged at the hospital. I remembered how quickly they decided to sell the house. I remembered Trent's comments about my savings. Cordelia and Trent weren't just putting me somewhere safe. They were getting rid of a burden and preparing to receive their inheritance at the same time. Perhaps they were even hoping that at autumn days with minimal care, I wouldn't last too long. When they returned to the room, I pretended to doze off. I heard Cordelia say, "We'll stop by again in a couple days before we leave." Departure? I opened my eyes, feigned sleepiness. "Yeah, Cordelia hesitated. "We were going to tell you. We've had a vacation planned for a long time, 2 weeks in Europe. We thought about canceling because of your illness, but now that you're settled and safe." "Of course," I said. "Go enjoy yourself." I could see the relief on their faces. They had expected scandal, recriminations, maybe even tears. But I didn't give them that pleasure. Instead, I began to contemplate how to use their absence to my advantage. When they left, I sat at the window, looking out at the empty parking lot. A plan was forming in my head. I wasn't going to put up with being a helpless old man who had been turned in for recycling. I still had access to my bank accounts. I still had connections from my professional life. And I still had a sharp mind despite the stroke that had occurred. I watched Cordelia and Trent get into their expensive new car, probably bought in anticipation of my inheritance, and drive away. I sat at the window of my room at autumn days, watching Cordelia and Trent transfer some packages into the trunk of their brand new SUV in the parking lot. Their vacation to Europe started tomorrow, a 2-week tour of France, Italy, and Spain. They stopped at my place before they left to say goodbye. I wanted to believe that they felt a modicum of shame leaving on a luxurious trip while I stayed in this dreary place, but their animated gestures and happy smiles said otherwise. "We'll be calling, Father," Cordelia said, peeking into my room. She was wearing an expensive pantsuit that had undoubtedly been bought especially for the trip. "You have the number 04 hotel in Paris, and I left all the contacts at the front desk." "Don't worry about me," I replied with feigned cheerfulness. "Enjoy your vacation." "We'll bring you some souvenirs," Trent promised, standing at the door and glancing at his watch. It was obvious he was in a hurry to get away. "Take care of her," I told him. It was a phrase I'd said many times over the years of their marriage, but today there was a special irony in it. When they left, I felt relief for the first time since moving into autumn days. Their presence had been weighing on me, reminding me of betrayal and helplessness. Now that they were out of sight, I could ponder my next steps without interference. The first days in the nursing home were a real challenge for me. The daily routine was monotonous to the point of nausea. Rise at 6 o'clock in the morning, breakfast at 7, medication at 8, group activities for those who co-participate at 10 o'clock, lunch at 12 o'clock, quiet time, dinner at 6 o'clock, and bedtime at 9 o'clock. The food was bland and tasteless, the facility sterile and impersonal, and the staff professionally indifferent. My dining room roommates were 3 older men about my age. Cecil and Henry, a former accountant with Parkinson's disease, Edward, a retired high school history teacher who constantly confused the present with the past. And Roger, once the owner of Asmal Print Shop, but now just a grumpy old man with a grudge against everything. You'll get used to it, Roger told me on the third day, noticing my disgust at my picking at the tasteless mashed potatoes, or die. The latter was more likely. I wasn't going to get used to it or die despite the stroke. My brain was working clearly enough to realize that I needed to find a way out of this situation. Fortunately, Cordelia hadn't been able to gain complete control of my finances. She only had access to one of my accounts, the one that paid for my stay at Autumn Days. The rest of my accounts and investments remained under my control. On the fourth day of my stay at the nursing home, I noticed a man in Thecamon living room who stood out sharply from the usual visitors. While most came in jeans or casual clothes, this one was dressed in an impeccable suit that even my fashion-unsophisticated eye identified as expensive. He was in his mid-40s South with an appearance that might have been considered unremarkable if it weren't for the intelligent, attentive eyes behind the stylish, thin-rimmed glasses. He wasn't visiting anyone in particular, but seemed to be looking around the institution. I noticed him politely but insistently questioning the receptionist about something, making notes in a small notebook. Then he waist-talking to one of the nurses, asking questions and listening carefully to the answers. At one point, our eyes crossed and he gave me a slight nod, as if acknowledging my presence among the impersonal mass of the house inhabitants. The next day, I saw him again, this time in the cafeteria. Deciding I had nothing to lose, I made my way to the coffee table next to him. Leaning on the cane I'd been given for mobility, I pretended to try to handle the coffee machine. The coffee here is terrible, I said, fiddling with the buttons deliberately. I never thought I'd miss regular instant coffee, but this drink is making me reevaluate my priorities. The man smiled, and his face instantly changed, becoming more open and friendly. I absolutely agree, he replied. I'd say it's not coffee, but brown water with a pretension. Let me help you. He deftly operated the machine and handed me a cup. Peter. Randall, he introduced himself, extending his hand. Ebenezer Hollister, I said, shaking his hand. You don't look like you're related to anyone here. And I'm not, Peter nodded. I'm a lawyer specializing in family law and elder law. I'm doing some kind of audit of this place at the request of some families. What were your impressions? I asked with genuine interest. Peter looked around, made sure no one was listening, and lowered his voice. Let's just say I wouldn't recommend this place to my clients. The basic care is there, but the quality leaves a lot to be desired. How long have you been here? A little over a week, I answered. My daughter and son-in-law decided that after my stroke, I needed ongoing care, so they chose Autumn Days. Peter paused. Not the most impressive choice, if I may say so. They chose the cheapest option, I said bluntly, deciding not to beat around the bush. Decided to sell my house and go to Europe to enjoy life while I lived out my days here on a basic package deal. Peter didn't seem shocked by my candor. Instead, he nodded understandingly. Unfortunately, it's a typical story. I see it all too often. In my practice, you said you wouldn't recommend this place to your clients, I continued. What would you recommend? It depends on the financial possibilities, of course, Peter replied. But if we're talking about the best option in Charlotte, it's definitely Golden Harbor. Golden Harbor, I interjected. I'd never heard of it. It's a high-end nursing home on the north side of town, Peter explained. It's a whole different level of care. Individual suites, 24-hour medical care, 5-star meals, spa, pool, cultural programs. It's more like a luxury hotel than a nursing home. Sounds impressive, I said, and it must be impressively expensive. Yes, it's not cheap, Peter admitted. but the quality of life is incomparably better. I've helped many clients move there and not a single one has regretted the decision. Many say it's the best years of their lives. This information stuck with me. I was looking thoughtfully at my coffee cup when Peter spoke again. Look, Mr. Hollister, I don't want to be intrusive, but if you need legal advice regarding your situation, I might be able to help. Why? I asked you bluntly. We had just met. Peter smiled. Let's just say I have a soft spot for people who are underestimated by their own children. Besides, you seem to me to be a man who is not used to giving up without a fight. I looked at him carefully, trying to determine if he had ulterior motives, but his gaze was open and sincere. Here's my business card, he said, pulling a small rectangle of heavy paper from his inside jacket pocket. If you decide you need help, just give me a call. I took the card and put it in my shirt pocket. Thank you, Mr. Rundle. I'll think about your offer. Please call me Peter, he said, standing up. I better be going. It was nice to meet you, Mr. Hollister. Ebenezer, I corrected him. It was nice to meet you, too. After he left, I sat for a long time thinking about our conversation. Golden Harbor sounded like a place where a man could grow old with dignity, not just live out his days in a faceless room. Perhaps it was exactly the outlet I was looking for. Fate fiending, I pulled out my old laptop, which Cordelia had reluctantly left me, believing that at my age and condition, I was unlikely to need it. Connecting to Autumn Day's weak Wi-Fi, I began to explore Golden Harbor. The website was impressive. Professionally done with photos of the luxury suites, chef-driven restaurant, pool, spa area, and manicured gardens. Resident reviews were of reviews. I also found an article in the local newspaper about how Golden Harbor is changing the perception of nursing homes, turning the last years of life into a golden autumn rather than a fading one. The cost was really high, much higher than what Cordelia and Trent were paying for Autumn Days, but I had savings and investments that I still had access to, and most importantly, I had a clear understanding of what I wanted to do. The next morning, I called Peter Rundle. Mr. Rundle, I said when he answered, "This is Ebenezer Hollister from Autumn Days. We spoke yesterday." "Of course, Mr. Hollister." His voice sounded friendly. "What can I do for you?" "I want to visit Golden Harbor," I said bluntly. "And if it's as you describe, I want to move there as soon as possible." "I see," Peter answered without surprise, as if he'd been expecting this call. "I can arrange a visit today. I have a good relationship with the administration." "That's great," I said. "But there is only problem. I have to get out of here somehow." "Don't worry about that," Peter said confidently. "I'll pick you up at 2 o'clock. We'll tell the administration you're meeting with a lawyer on a personal matter." Technically, that would be true. At 2 o'clock, Peter did indeed show up at Autumn Days, dressed in the same immaculate suit as when we first met. He exchanged a few words with the receptionist, and soon we were on our way in his comfortable automobile toward North Charlotte. "Are you sure you want to do this right now?" Peter asked as we pulled onto Fay Highway. "Usually decisions like this take time to think about. I'm 77 years old, Mr. Rundle," I answered. "I don't have time for long deliberation. If Golden Harbor is even half as good as what you've told me, I'll sign the papers today." Peter nodded understandingly. "By the way, we have an appointment with Agnes Woodward, the resident I told you about. She has kindly agreed to show you her apartment and answer your questions. 20 minutes later, we arrived at the Golden Harbor. The building itself was impressive. Modern architecture, plenty of glass and light, surrounded by a well-kept park with flower beds and meat paths. Nothing about the place reminded us of a stereotypical nursing home. Inside, we were greeted by a spacious hall with marble floor, comfortable sofas, and live plants. There were paintings hanging on the walls that looked like originals, not cheap reproductions. The staff was dressed in elegant uniforms and held themselves with a professional benevolence, a far cry from the indifference of the Autumn Day staff. We were ushered into the office of the director, Richard Brighton, a trim, middle-aged man with energetic manners and a shrewd eye. "Mr. Hollister, it's a pleasure to meet you," he said, shaking my hand. "Peter told me about your situation. Golden Harbor was designed for people like you, active, independent, wanting to maintain control of your life, but needing some support." After a brief conversation in the office, Mr. Brighton offered a tour of the grounds. We visited the restaurant where the tables were covered with tablecloths and set with china and crystal, the spa with a swimming pool and jacuzzi, the library with an impressive collection of books, the cinema room, the room for games and creativity. "Now, let's have a look at the apartments," the director suggested. We have several options from studios to two-bedroom suites. We looked at 3 types of apartments, and they were all spacious, bright, with modern furniture and appliances. They were real homes, not hospital rooms. Finally, we met Agnes Woodward, an elegant woman of about 75 with short-cropped gray hair and lively blue eyes. She invited us into her apartment, a cozy living room with a separate bedroom and a small kitchen. "Welcome to my humble abode," she smiled, gesturing for us to sit down. "Tea? Coffee? Thank you." "I'd love some coffee," I replied, looking around. Agnes' apartment was personalized. There were pictures on the walls, books on the shelves, and unfinished embroidery on the table. "How long have you lived here?" I asked. When she brought coffee, 5 years, Agnes answered. "The best 5 years of my life since I retired. Yaukno, when I was widowed, my children insisted that I move in with them or to a regular nursing home. But I discover at this place and have never once regretted my decision." We talked to Agnes for about an hour. She told me about the daily life in Golden Harbor, about the other residents, about how the medical care was organized. The more I listened, the stronger my resolve became. "But you realize it's expensive," Agnes warned towards the end of the conversation. "Many people have to sell their houses to afford this kind of life." "I have savings," I replied. "And to be honest, I like the idea of spending that money on myself instead of leaving it to my daughter who put me in a cheap nursing home." Agnes nodded. "Understandingly, you know, Ebenezer, sometimes the best lesson we can teach our children is to show them that our lives belong to us, not to them." After saying goodbye to Agnes, we returned to the principal suffice to discuss financial details. Mr. Brighton showed me several payment options, including the possibility of a long-term fixed-rate contract. "We have a vacant apartment right now," he said. "If you are interested, we can start the paperwork." "I am interested," I said firmly. "I want to move in as soon as possible. There is one detail," Peter intervened. "Mr. Hollister has partial custody of his daughter after her stroke, but I've reviewed the paperwork and there's a legal loophole. The guardianship covers certain aspects of her health, but it doesn't cover major financial decisions. We can work within those restrictions," Mr. Brighton said confidently. "Our lawyers will help formalize everything correctly." Within the next 2 hours, I had signed the preliminary papers, made the deposit, and set a date for the move 3 days later, just in time for Cordeline Trent to be in the middle of their European tour. As Peter and I drove back to Autumn Days, I felt like a different person. Hope and anticipation had supplanted apathy and despair. "What do you think your daughter will say when she returns and discovers you've moved?" Peter asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I'm sure it will be an interesting conversation." That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time, but not because of anxiety or pain as usual, but Becca's of excitement and anticipation. For the first time since my stroke, it felt like I was back in control of my life. And that feeling was priceless. The morning of my visit to Golden Harbor was remarkably clear. The sun was shining outside the window as if approving my decision. I dressed carefully, choosing my best suit, which Cordelia had left me, thinking I wouldn't need it in the nursing home. By 10 o'clock, I was fully prepared and waiting in the lobby of Autumn Days. At exactly 10 hours and 30 minutes, a black sedan pulled up outside the entrance. Peter Rundle stepped out as trim and elegant as when we first met. "Ready for a big change, Ebenezer?" he asked, shaking my hand. "More than ready," I replied, feeling an unusual burst of energy. The administrator of Autumn Days, a middle-aged woman, with a perpetually tired face, gave us a look. "Mr. Hollister is going to consult a lawyer," Peter explained with a professional smile. "We'll be back this evening." She nodded without much interest. Autumn Days cared little where their wards went as long as they had someone to look after them. The drive to Golden Harbor took about half an hour. Along the way, Peter gave details about the institution that would soon become my new home. Dr. James Harrington founded it 15 years ago, Peter said, maneuvering nimbly through the morning traffic. He was a geriatrician and had seen how horribly the elderly were treated in ordinary nursing homes. Golden Harbor was his answer to this problem, a place where old age can be a new beginning, not an end. When we arrived, I was amazed. The pictures on the website didn't convey the full grandeur of the place. Golden Harbor was located on the grounds of a former country club, surrounded by old oak trees and manicured gardens. The main building was an elegant 3-story, colonial-style structure, and surrounding it were several cottages connected by covered galleries. We were greeted in the lobby by an elegant woman who introduced herself as Veronica Clark, the Director of Client Relations. "Mr. Hollister, we're so glad to see you," she said with genuine warmth in her voice. "Peter has told us a lot about you. Welcome to Golden Harbor." The next 2 hours passed like a dream. Veronica took us all over the complex, showing us everything that might interest a potential resident. I saw a spacious library with thousands of books and comfortable chairs for reading, an art studio where seniors practice painting and sculpture, a music room with a grand piano and other instruments. But it was the living quarters that really impressed me. Veronica showed me several options of apartments, from cozy studios to spacious 2-room suites. All of them were decorated with impeccable taste, equipped with modern technology and security systems. "These aren't just rooms," Veronica explained. "It's your home. You can furnish it with your own furniture, hang your own pictures, even repaint the walls if you want. Our goal is to make you feel at home here." After touring the living quarters, we headed to the Golden Harbor restaurant. Unlike the Autumn Days dining room with its plastic tables and bland food, this was a true haute cuisine restaurant. Eatables were covered with snow-white tablecloths served with china and crystal. The chef personally came up to introduce himself and tell us about the menu. "We have 4 meals a day," he explained with a noticeable French accent. "Breakfast, lunch, afternoon snack, and dinner. All meals are prepared with fresh produce, taking into account the dietary requirements of each resident. If you have special preferences or restrictions, we will always find a solution." We dined in their restaurant and the food was delicious, on par with the finest establishment where Eleanor and I celebrated our wedding anniversaries. After lunch, Veronica showed us the Golden Harbor Medical Center, a modern clinic with the latest equipment and a staff of doctors of various specialties. A general practitioner, neurologist, and cardiologist are on duty here all the time, she explained. If necessary, we can provide round-the-clock individualized care, but our philosophy is not to impose help, but to provide it when it is really needed. We respect the independence of our residents. The final part of the tour was the wellness center with a swimming pool, jacuzzi, sauna, and gym specially equipped for seniors. Physical activity is the key to longevity, said Veronica. Our trainers develop individual programs for each resident, taking into account their abilities and limitations. By the end of the tour, I had no doubts. Golden Harbor was exactly where I wanted to spend the rest of my days. Here they respected the dignity of the elderly. Here they created conditions not for living but for a full life. Waiting for us in Veronica's office was Richard Brighton, the executive director of Golden Harbor, an energetic man in his 50s with a penetrating gaze and a firm handshake. Mr. Hollister, he said as we sat down at the conference table, Peter has told him about your situation. I want you to know that we accept residents not only on the basis of their financial ability, but also by assessing whether they are a good fit for our community. And I can see that you're a perfect fit for Golden Harbor. Thank you for the compliment, I replied, but let's talk business. How much does it cost to live here? Richard said an amount that was several times what Cordelia and Trent were paying for Autumn Days, but I was prepared for that. There are several payment options, he continued. Monthly installments, an annual fixed-rate contract, or a special offer for those planning a long-term stay. You can transfer ownership of your home and a portion of your savings to us in exchange for living here for life. This will guarantee you a place in Golden Harbor for the rest of your life, regardless of changes in your financial situation. I glanced over to Peter. We had discussed this possibility earlier, and I had already made up my mind. It's exactly what I need, I said. My house is empty now, and I don't want my daughter and son-in-law to have the money from sale. I'd rather use it to make sure I have a decent old age. A wise decision, Richard nodded. But there are legal considerations. Peter has already explained to me that your daughter has certain custodial rights after your stroke. Limited rights, Peter clarified. They only apply to certain aspects of health care, but they don't affect financial decisions. Besides, Mr. Hollister underwent an independent medical examination that confirmed his full capacity. He took a folder of documents out of his briefcase and handed it to Richard. Everything is in order, the director said, looking over the papers. We can finalize the deal today if you're ready. I'm more than ready, I said. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the details of the contract. Peter scrutinized every clause, explaining the legal details to me. Finally, when everything was agreed upon, I signed several copies of the document. Congratulations, Mr. Hollister. Richard smiled, shaking my hand. You are now officially a resident of Golden Harbor. When would you like to move in? As soon as possible, I answered, preferably tomorrow. Tomorrow? Veronica was surprised. Usually, our residents need more time to pack and say goodbye. I have no one to say goodbye to at Autumn Days, I said firmly. And I don't have a lot of stuff. I think 1 suitcase will be enough. In that case, we'll be glad to see you tomorrow. Richard nodded. Veronica will have your apartment ready by 12 o'clock. As Peter and I drove back to Autumn Days, I felt an unusual excitement. For the first time in a long time, I looked forward to the future with hope rather than despair. You know, Ebenezer, Peter said as we drove up to Autumn Days. I think I should give your daughter some notice of the move. Not that you have to report to her, but still. I have a better idea, I replied with a smile. I'll send her a message that will definitely get her attention. Back in my room, I pulled out the cell phone Cordelia had insisted I keep with me at all times in case of emergency.